got your supplements and functional foods, legal developments, ingredient news, education, inspiration, entertainment, insider in the afternoon.
Hey everybody, Todd Rumstead here for another edition of Insider in the Afternoon. If it's Wednesday afternoon, it's time for Insider in the Afternoon. Thanks for joining us. I'm the senior editor over at naturalproductsinsider.com. You can follow all of our day-to-day activity there. But on Wednesday, sit back, relax, or sit up and take notes. We're going to make you a better person in the industry. We're going to talk about ingredients and just how to formulate better, how to market better, how to be better. That's what we want to do right now. Hey, one of the things I like to do from time to time is what I call inside my inbox. I get all kinds of emails, and a lot of them I just delete, and some of them we develop into stories, and some of them are kind of like this in-betweener spot. And here's one really interesting thing. I received this, and this was a study that got published in the journal Nature, which is a pretty big time journal. And they had that hypocalcemia is considered a strong predictor of in-hospital COVID-19 deaths. Hypo, that means hypo, not enough calcium. So if you're deficient in calcium, oh my God, you're gonna die of COVID. My new favorite, stuffy. Isn't that lovely? And then they also had that seriously ill COVID patients had significantly lower magnesium levels. So interestingly enough, it's like nutritionation is actually prudent in service of warding off severe cytokine storm and the resulting poor outcomes in hospitalized patients with COVID. And so interestingly enough, when I think of magnesium, now last week I was reading from Dr. Low Dog's book on Fortify Your Life, and I didn't get to this, but she had this really one interesting chapter that really I think should make a difference when you're formulating and marketing and labeling your magnesium products. She writes, as for minerals, maybe you've read that magnesium is good for preventing migraine headaches. And indeed it is. You go to the store and look at the magnesium section. Do you take magnesium alone or with calcium? Is there a difference between magnesium oxide, citrate, lactate, malate, glycinate? Is one better than another? Will magnesium supplements interfere with any of your prescription meds? When should you take this supplement and in what dosage? Phew, that's an important point. Like when we get in the weeds and we're like, oh, maybe it's the magnesium glycinate that's the most bioavailable. Well, then if you use that, even if it's more expensive, you should say that. Like, you should write that on your label. I think that's an important point. Oh, speaking of magnesium, might as well take one right now. 400 milligrams. I just chewed on an ice cube. And one of the interesting things that you hear about magnesium, if you take magnesium, you can take less vitamin D. Vitamin D is the antidote for COVID. Well, sure, there's the vaccine, but there's also vitamin D. That's right. So there's all kinds of things that can help us be better people out there. And the interesting thing, I was digging into the study, and what they showed was they had a level of what was appropriate calcium. And so they were saying it's between 9.6 and 10.1, so a pretty narrow window, milligrams per deciliter. 38% of the patients were less than 7.9. And so it just goes to show that was a problem. But also 1/3 of the patients with hypercalcemia, too much, were on calcium supplements, and they also had a problem. So that suggests that there's a pretty big, like a narrow window of what is the appropriate calcium, content you should have, and with supplementation. So a lot of times it's easy for us to take calcium, but we don't often take enough. But sometimes, oh, I should take 1,000 milligrams. Well, maybe you don't have to formulate with that much of a supplement, and that's a communication idea. So interesting stuff going on in the world of vitamins. One other thing inside my inbox, another study, and it showed it was about children age 2 to 19, and it showed, or no, well, there was that, but then there was a part of it, and this was part of the NHANES study, pretty big time study. And between 1 and 6 years old, they were inadequate in vitamin D, vitamin E, calcium, fiber, choline, and potassium, as well as omega-3s, DHA. So there's a lot of things that we're really deficient in. So like if you're making children's supplements, these are the things that you need to have in there, and then communicate that message around the deficiencies. So that's our little tale right now. Let's talk about botanicals, because botanicals is another huge supplement category. And we have with us Holly Johnson, the Chief Science Officer of the American Herbal Products Association. Holly, aloha. Take it away. Tell us something we don't already know about rhodiola.
Wonderful. Thank you, Todd. Yeah, like Todd said, I'm super happy to be here with y'all on Insider in the Afternoon. I am Holly Johnson, Dr. J. And I think we're going to talk just a little bit today on a quick little segment about rhodiola in particular, but also just in general, brainy botanicals and kind of the things that some of our herbs and botanicals are being used for in the modern world, right? So I think during the pandemic and in general, we all could use a little boost for our brain, right? So these are kind of three main categories in general that we talk about herbs in the brain. So there's cognitive support, sleep support, and stress support are kind of the new three major categories that have really been rolling around this year. So I'm going to talk just for a few minutes to you guys about adaptogens and the concept of adaptogens, and then a little bit more in depth about rhodiola rosea. So adaptogens, what the heck does that word mean? We all have had to adapt a lot during this pandemic and be resilient, right? So this word refers to kind of a category of substances. This concept kind of came around in the 1940s during World War II, when some researchers started thinking and medical doctors started thinking, hey, could we give a pill to people that might help them deal with some of the physical and mental stresses that they're under out there in the war, really, pilots, submariners, that kind of thing, soldiers. So this investigations kind of started in mass in the 40s. In through the 50s and 60s, this idea of kind of using herbal medicines to increase stamina, and not just survival and for a soldier, but really just stamina in general for people that are doing really difficult things physically and or mentally. So this concept was introduced and kind of came developed a little bit more during the 50s and 60s. And again, excuse me, I'm Dr. J, the science nerd, so I had to put at least one weird chart or something in here for you guys. Again, don't look too closely at this, but just the thing is that when we talk about adaptogens, what we're talking about is homeostasis, right? Trying to maintain like an even keel level so you don't get too stress response or too exhausted after that stress response. So you can see here in this little chart, kind of that bright pink line in the middle is kind of the adaptogenic effect that can be seen. And this has been documented in humans and in animals, kind of this effect of maintaining even keel and homeostasis. So that's in general kind of the theory of adaptogens, that there's this non-specific thing. So there's not like it's not like serotonin receptors or dopamine receptors in the brain where we kind of know certain compounds and how they interact with those G protein coupled receptors. In general, what they think of as adaptogens are, general. It's a non-specific, not a certain class of compounds or that type of thing, and really is good for stress protection, stimulatory and anti-fatigue type effects, which I think we can all use these days. I certainly can. After in this past year and a half spending, 10 hours a day at my laptop is not my normal job state. And so we all need a little bit more focus, right? Okay, so again, this normalizing effect of adaptogens. There was a ton of stress research in the 60s, and this is now, adaptogens are kind of part of a lot of major medical systems in Europe and the USSR in particular. So this is the part. I have some Swedish and Norwegian descent and love talking about things that the Vikings used to do. I also grew up in Minneapolis. So the Vikings sadly are my NFL team. Also, this plant, Rhodiola rosea, was really has a long history as a valuable medicinal plant. Was mentioned in 1749 by Carl Linnaeus, my favorite Swedish botanist, also by Dioscorides, and was in the first Swedish pharmacopoeia. It's a beautiful plant. Look at this, grows at high elevations and usually at high altitudes too. One of the major commercial sources now is Alaska. It's the roots that are used. And there's been all kinds of investigations. So here's just one clinical trial I pulled out for you guys. Investigation of fatigue during night shift work in young, healthy physicians. So this is an herb that's been tested quite a lot on healthy populations for mental fatigue, short-term memory, all this stuff. So showed some really significant improvements. You guys, there's so many more clinical trials, tons of them on rhodiola. Look at all these things: stress-induced fatigue, mild to moderate depression, a lot of sports performance things. So all kinds of data already out there, clinical trials in humans. And again, you know, as the ethnobotanist, I got to go back to the Vikings, right? If the Vikings were doing it, come on. And I guess somebody asked me this the other day. They said, well, Halsden, why aren't the Vikings still around drinking this stuff? So we're not really sure. But again, Rhodiola rosea, really long traditional use as a valuable medicinal plant and known now in commerce. There's some Viking people. There's my rhodiola that I take every day. Hopefully Todd will invite me back and we'll talk about all the other cool adaptogens. Much aloha, you guys.
Holly, that was awesome. And the Mighty Vikes were my team too. So I love them. And, you know, why aren't the Vikings still around? I guess raping and pillaging is no longer in style anymore. But, you know, Holly, thanks for that story on rhodiola. I love it. I remember Chris Killam years ago. He told me it's got, 400 milligrams will make you feel like $1 billion. And I was like, all right. Now, $1 billion ain't what it used to be, but still pretty cool. Hey, Holly, thanks. That was really great. Now let's move right along here on Insider in the Afternoon. Claire Morton Reynolds with Nutrition Business Journal, the brains behind the outfit and the data and the insights. Claire, what's the buzz?
Thanks, Todd. And actually, I'm now the third Viking football fan on this. We've got a new theme going for this Insider in the Afternoon. So thank you so much. I am so excited. And really quick, I'm going to give a quick plug. If you want tidbits like this from me in your inbox every other week, head over to nutritionbusinessjournal.com. And there's a tab called Newsletter. And it's free to register. And every other week, you get a little analyst take from what I'm seeing in the industry. So I'm going to today focus on the record year that was 2020 and what we're looking at moving forward. We actually just released our annual supplement business report last week, which is so exciting for us and is really more important and interesting than ever because 2020 was such a record year. So today I'm going to share with you just some of my favorite statistics about what happened in 2020. So again, a record year. The industry grew 14.5% last year, higher than our previous record of 14.4%, which was way back in 1997 when the industry was just 14 billion. And this year, that 14.5% brings our industry to 55.75 billion in annual sales. And what's the most notable about that is that it means that we added $7 billion in annual sales in 2020. And until you start to dig into that, it's hard to have that context for how much money that is added to our industry. So I actually pulled some statistics online of other things that are $7 billion to just really give us that context. So we added $7 billion in supplement sales. That's equivalent to Amazon's 2019 advertising spend. It's equivalent to the total plant-based food market in the US in 2019. It's equivalent to the United Nations yearly peacekeeping operations budget. And it's also equivalent to the amount Americans spent on Halloween in 2015. So just to give you some additional context for how much money that truly is, and kind of additional historical context, prior to last year, the industry was adding between $2 and $3 billion a year. So double or triple kind of previous added dollars. And so it's just, again, I can't really reiterate enough how much of a record year that is and how that really impacts what we look at moving forward. And I'll wrap up with kind of explaining what we're looking at moving forward. Another really interesting statistic is that with the acceleration of vitamins driven by immunity and general wellness, and the acceleration of e-commerce as a result of the pandemic, vitamins bought online accounted for 1 in every $5 added to total sales last year. And so 1 in $5, it's crazy, vitamins bought online. So from a category perspective, vitamins actually had the strongest performance, again, driven by immunity and this interest and resurgence in general health. Vitamin growth was 22.3%, adding about $3.5 billion to total vitamin sales last year. On the channel side, from a channel perspective, e-commerce dominated in sales growth, not surprisingly, as it has been, but accelerated to 87.3% growth, adding $4 billion to total e-commerce sales. And interestingly, vitamins, we really saw the pandemic bring vitamins out of a pretty flat growth curve. E-commerce, what we really saw was that acceleration of momentum already in the market. So combining, again, those two crazy growth trends, vitamins bought online accounted for 1 in every 5 added dollars, which is just super notable. And I want to end by just talking about what we consider following a year of record growth, right? Like, what is important to look at in the years to come now that our industry is so big, coming off of this pandemic and this record year. And typically kind of our first area we look at for success in a given year is growth rate. And naturally, as this market becomes bigger, growth might not be the best indicator of the future potential of the market. In fact, coming off of 14.5% growth, we see growth in 2021 dipping below 6% and kind of hovering around 3% for a couple years following this year. And it's important to not just focus on that single metric. In fact, even with that drop in growth, the outlook for supplements is so bright. We see that consumers are paying attention to their health in a new way and really turning to our industry for those solutions. You know, Holly pointed out those really important conditions right now involving our brain. So stress and sleep support having huge demand in addition to immunity and general wellness. And so with all of that and with these new trends coming out of last year, we really do expect a lasting boost to the industry of about 1.7 billion by 2024 and beyond. And so what that means is, as a result of 2020 and as a result of this pandemic and this increased awareness, the industry is gaining a lasting boost of almost a little over 1.5 billion. And so, again, I just want to wrap up by saying that while our focus may have changed on the metrics that we're tracking, either way we dissect it, the future for the industry is super bright. So with that, I will pass it back to you, Todd. Thank you.
Cool, Claire, that's awesome. You know, I was beginning to think that the supplements industry was pretty big, but then it's only the equivalent of the Halloween spend. So, oh my God, the sugar lobby, we're like as big as the sugar lobby. I guess there's all those Halloween stores and, you know, masks and, you know, there's all kinds of other stuff. Hey, hold on. How embarrassing. Thanks for that. Now let's move on with the Toddcast, and I've got a special guest now, Marielle Weintraub. She is the president of the U.S. Hemp Authority. Now, the U.S. Hemp Authority, they come up with these, quality standards for the industry, and they just came out with version 3.0. So I think it's a really interesting thing in a brand new segment in the supplements market of hemp CBD. And so really something that we want to talk about. Marielle, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing excellent. So Marielle, before we dig into the issues or into the standards, let's talk about Delta 8. Let's just jump right into the deep end of the pool. I mean, Delta 8, it's sort of like the Farm Bill said, it's all good except for Delta 9 THC. And so then that created an opening. Well, from a chemistry standpoint, there's Delta 8, which isn't get high marijuana, but it still apparently gets you a little buzzed. And so, you know, what do we do about this? You know, is it something to allow or to not allow? What's the position of the U.S. Hemp Authority?
So the position of the U.S. Hemp Authority actually hasn't changed, including cannabinoids like Delta 8, since we started. At no point have we ever allowed companies to be certified, or I guess products to be certified that were marketing the product for an intoxicating reason or an intoxicating purpose. So we came out with a statement in March of this year, reminding people that Delta 8 products wouldn't be able to be certified through Hemp Authority based on their intoxicating nature and the marketing for intoxicating effects. Now, that's not to say that Delta 8 doesn't have its place. I actually have seen a lot of good research coming out about the effects that Delta 8 can have, for instance, on cognitive decline. But based on the intoxicating effects and its very close similarity to Delta 9, I do believe that these products should be found in dispensaries next to Delta 9, because I think it's important that they have the proper oversight and the proper warnings, which right now, if they're being sold under the guise of hemp, they're not going to have on them.
Right. Good point. Good point. So now that I jumped ahead, now let's jump back, for all of you people who understand the nature of that big Delta 8 issue. So let's just jump back and sort of US Hemp Authority 101. What's the big idea? What's it all about?
So the US Hemp Authority started as a self-regulatory organization. The idea is back in about 2017, 2018. When there were far fewer companies out there. We were still worried about a company having what we called a 60 minutes moment and bringing down the entire industry before we all really had a chance to shine. Except that we saw that there was some dragging of the feet by FDA to give us some supplement or to give us some standards or some guidance. And we wanted to make sure that people in the industry, products in the industry, and consumers of the industry were safe, had access to quality products. And the idea came about that we would then create a certification program with standards that listed specific quality specifications, that listed specific testing, that listed things that could and could not be in products. We wanted to raise confidence in the products. We wanted to raise confidence of regulators when it came to these products. And we wanted to make sure that we were protecting our industry and our industry's consumers at the same time.
Yeah, that's interesting. When the hemp and CBD, industry took off, that was all coming from, it wasn't coming from the traditional supplements industry. It was coming, if anything, more from like the marijuana industry, which has it doesn't have, there's no FDA oversight at all of that. That was the big end around. The people were like, we want this different kind of healthcare. So, I've been around and I hear people that are like, oh yeah, man, like my stuff's the best ever. How many times do you hear that? And then all of a sudden discover, oh yeah, you completely failed our test results. Like they don't even understand that there was a test.
So the way that the Hemp Authority was originally designed and the way it's still designed today is that when you want to be certified, you actually go through our third-party independent certifiers. So right now we use Food Chain ID. They're the ones who actually developed the non-GMO butterfly certification originally. And so you would sign up with them. They will come out to your facility. It's an on-site. There's a desk portion, but there's also an on-site audit. And so what we wanted to avoid way back when there were maybe 50 companies in the room was we didn't want anyone not to apply to be certified in the fear that their friends would find out that they failed. So we did have the separation built. Now, I work in the industry because the US Hemp Authority is a volunteer position. It is a nonprofit organization. And so I myself have run into this issue a lot more years ago than I do now, where I went to buy flour. I was looking for a certain percentage of CBD in that flour. And when I tested, it came up short. But that was completely separate from people who are applying for the Hemp Authority and through testing realized that maybe their stuff isn't up to snuff.
Yeah, what has struck me is that, with natural products, you have just this inherent variability. You know, it's not like a single synthetic chemical constituent pharmaceutical where they could say, oh yeah, every time, every dose, you're going to get exactly this because we've measured it out. Whereas like, especially with botanicals, you know, you can have, you know, all you got to do is look out in your lawn and not every blade of grass is the same. Is there something that you see that's in cannabis that's a little more challenging? You know, maybe because many of these in the hemp business, they didn't come from the traditional botanicals business even, or the supplements industry. So they're just not aware of these more precise analytical testing to vouchsafe quality, you know, and maybe they think, oh yeah, and I imagine it's changed a little over the last 5 years. I think the industry has grown up quite a bit. But do you find people that are approaching you, they kind of come to the U.S. Hemp Authority kind of, oh yeah, we know what we want. We've got our, you know, QA, QC together, you know, tell us if we're doing it right?
So what's interesting is this actually is harder for the hemp industry and the cannabis industry than I would say it is for some of the other more traditional botanical products out there. Because what the other botanical products have that we don't are what are called reference standards. So these are well-known standards that can be used by labs doing testing to have like comparison testing. So if you want to know how pure your ginseng is, you compare it to a reference standard of pure ginseng. We don't have that yet. Luckily, NIST, it's part of the government organizations, but it's actually, I think, in the commerce division versus in like justice or regulatory, have started to create laboratory reference standards. And this is going to be absolutely fantastic for us, which is why the U.S. Hemp Authority has offered assistance to NIST for this program that they are now have started and are in, I think, already in the second or third phase of. But I think that's going to make a big difference for us. At the same time, I know, so Holly Johnson, who spoke for, and I are both a part of AOAC CASP, which is helping to develop and asking for analytical methods so that we can have more standardized analytical methods for the cannabis and hemp industries. And I know there are groups like APA, the American Herbal Products Association, and the U.S. Hemp Authority that are also trying to unify language, to unify vocabulary, the glossaries, and the words used in our industry, because there are going to be differences between the hemp industry and the traditional botanical industry.
Right. And so that leads right into the question, APA, you know, of whom, you know, Holly Johnson is a part of. They recently came out with their sort of position statement. And I read that, and it was a pretty, you know, dense document, but there was one thing that I was like, whoa, wait. And it was on full spectrum and broad spectrum and the definitions thereof. And to me, they were kind of coming at it from a traditional herbal or botanicals business, and really not at all when, like, they weren't using the terms that are used in the hemp business or cannabis business. Is that a problem, or you know, or is this just inside baseball and it doesn't really matter to consumers? What do you think?
So interestingly, so I'm on the APA Cannabis Committee. I was a part of the group that helped develop that glossary. I also spoke till I was blue in the face about making sure that caveat statement written in the glossary around the full spectrum, broad spectrum extracts did note that the hemp industry was using these in a very different way. And I wanted to make sure that was called out. They also then listed a portion of the U.S. Hemp Authority glossary term for those two terms in the APA lexicon, which I think is important, because I think the APA lexicon, as you said, came from a very botanical, traditional botanical point of view. It was also very heavily written from a chemist point of view, versus the way we're using it in the hemp industry and how our consumers understand those terms. And so I did want to point those out, but at the same time, it is the APA glossary and the U.S. Hemp Authority the U.S. Hemp Authority glossary and the APA lexicon are going to get closer, because at this point, the technical committee from the U.S. Hemp Authority is already viewing the APA lexicon to see which terms we can add to our glossary to bring our industry's verbiage closer together.
Yeah. So for the uninitiated, I mean, am I right in thinking broad spectrum is it's basically a hemp extract, but with THCs like completely removed, and maybe some other cannabinoids, whereas full spectrum is like, okay, here it is, but it definitely has less than 0.3% THC. That's like the legal definition of hemp. Is that the difference? But in neither case are they like, it can't have synthetic and it can't really be engineered. Like, do I have that roughly right?
You do. So with broad spectrum, THC is purposefully removed. Full spectrum, the THC needs to be under 0.3% as per the definition in the Farm Bill. You can't make up a broad spectrum by Frankensteining a bunch of isolates together. That does not make a broad spectrum extract. And the U.S. Hemp Authority does not allow GMO'd hemp to be used, nor does it allow synthetics. We believe that the Farm Bill passed for the farmers, and that cannabinoids should come from hemp.
So I can imagine a franken-fooding of cannabinoids as these new minor cannabinoids come out. Oh, CBN or CBG. Oh, maybe they start tinkering, putting some terpenes in there, and all of a sudden, aha, here's this consumer benefit. I could see that happening, but that would not be U.S. Hemp Authority. So, Marielle, we're almost done, but I'm really curious, because you and I, we met a few years ago when you were still working at Eurofins, and it's an analytical testing lab. And so I'm just curious, like, how did that experience as an analytical testing lab set you up for success for what the U.S. Hemp Authority is doing?
So I think it actually totally shaped what I ended up doing and what I do now, because I was actually, at that time, it was Covance. It was bought by Eurofins a few years later. But I was actually in charge of business development in the dietary supplement world. So I was traveling a lot in Colorado and Utah. And what I had to do in that case was learn the methods, learn the regulations, understand the CFRs, understand what FDA is looking for. And it's with that knowledge that I was able to very easily transfer from the dietary supplement, traditional dietary supplements, over into the hemp industry. Because although they do not officially rule over us yet, the FDA is coming. And so being able to use my knowledge of the CFRs, of FDA, of what's expected, of food safety, of testing, is really the base of how we started developing the U.S. Hemp Authority standards.
That's really cool. So we only got maybe about another minute, but I'm just curious. So, you've had 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. I imagine 4.0, like, it'll be out there. And so I'm just curious, how does the evolution of these different points happen? Is it just conversations with your own member companies, with the industry at large, with regulatory bodies? How does that work?
So we don't really have member companies. We have people who pass the certification and the audit, and those who don't. But what we do have is a technical committee made up of stakeholders from across the different hemp industry sections. We have growers, we have manufacturers, we have academics, we have people from the different dietary supplement associations. Actually, Holly Johnson sits on our technical committee. And a lot of the ideas and the change is actually going to be driven through them. We then hold 2 public comment periods a year, and we take those public comment periods very, very seriously. It was actually a public comment period between 1.0 and 2.0, where someone turned in the information about making sure we don't allow non-GMO hemp into the program. And I wasn't sure yet if GMO hemp even existed, but we did agree, and that's how that got added. That was a public comment that we added into our standards. And so it really is driven by our technical committee and the public. So I do suggest people interact with us, send us emails, and look for those public comment periods.
Very cool. I love the transparency in there. Marielle Weintraub from the U.S. Hemp Authority, thanks very much. That's all we have time for here this week on Insider in the Afternoon. Thanks for joining us, everybody. And if it's Wednesday afternoon, it's Insider in the Afternoon. We'll see you next week.
Sustainable